There's always been a strange kind of naivety with both the Chinese and the Russians, believing or wanting to believe that there can be some degree of peaceful coexistence, even as we are in the midst of this profound historical change globally.
We should stop talking about these governments of the major major BRICS nations as being, pure as the driven snow, because that's just not true.
Sorry to be so harsh, but if you are an anti-imperialist society, you say our universities are good enough, my kids stay here.
Most people in the world don't understand the Western white mind, and that's what gets them in deep trouble. And this is, I know people get uncomfortable when we start talking about the fact that you can't build a revolutionary alternative. You can't build an anti-imperialist global movement unless people come to terms with the ideological and material foundation of white supremacy.
You're standing there on your flip-flops and you see your sister, your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather all being killed, and you need to be Gandhi?
I think that Ro Khanna is an excellent example of a non-white person who's a white supremacist.
Good day, everyone. We are here again with brothers Ajamu and Dimitri Lascaris. We already started this show with a very cool introduction about us. How do you say that? Crossing the 20,000 subscribers line. We had a great conversation. Dimitri gave me really, really great compliments about how our channel is fantastic and should get many, many more subscribers. I won't go back into that. I forgot to press on record, so we just lost that part of the conversation. I'm very, very sorry. Guys, again, welcome to the show. I just wanted to jump right into where we were. We were discussing a video from Jamal Thomas where he interviewed Warwick Powell about China easing the effect of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz by tapping into its own oil reserves, and therefore keeping the price of oil relatively low, and therefore helping Trump. And Jamal Thomas becomes quite annoyed by it. He also says, I find that annoying. I thought that China was in the anti-imperialist camp supporting BRICS.
The Chinese leadership has come to the view that they'd much rather the global economy not be tanked as a result of all of this, even if this is helpful to President Trump, and maybe that's a side effect of all of this stuff. But there is nothing great to be gained from excessive levels of global economic disruption and excessive levels of political pain for the American president.
Dr. Powell, that's an annoying, if that's true, that's, okay, let me put it in a different context. A lot of people look at it.
They're not doing this out of benevolence, I should say, but more a case of, the general assessment is there's a certain amount of disruption that is going to happen. It is either going to be exacerbated if China bought heavy in the market, pushing prices up, or it's going to be slightly moderated if China eased off. And I think the judgment call is they would rather it be moderated rather than exacerbated.
I think the thing that people who look at this in a geopolitical sense, I'm sorry about the train. The people who look at this in a geopolitical sense look at it in a way that often puts Russia, China, and Iran together, because people believe, and I think they're right, that their interests are some level united. I mean, for God's sake, all of them are part of BRICS. The US obviously attacked Iran in an unprovoked war. You would think that, I believe countries are cynical entities, so it's not that I think China feels some kind of way, but you would think that their interests would be aligned. If Iran takes the Strait to use as an economic weapon, and then China turns around and does something that lessens the impact of that weapon, does that not extend the war and cut against Iran's interests?
What's going on here? Why would China help the United States keep the oil price low, while that is exactly the tactic of Iran, to hurt the economy to such an extent that the empire is forced to stop? I am also at a loss here. What's going on? I find it frustrating. And while many media do not want that nuanced discussion, that kind of triumph, they are often very triumphalist, where it's not allowed to have a nuanced discussion about the side that we sympathize with. One of the few channels that does that is Jamal Thomas, but also you, Dimitri, and I've seen you also questioning this kind of tactic. What is your idea behind this? Why are they doing this?
So let's start with what we know, and I want to talk about whether they're doing it, because I think that's the threshold question. Jamal and Warwick Powell had a discussion which assumed that they did it. What is the evidence of that, as far as I'm aware? The evidence is basically oil industry experts, including many who are very skeptical of Trump's narrative about the negotiations and the course of this war and the purposes of this war. They seem to be in agreement. If there's a political spectrum that exists within the oil industry community, I would say that people across the political spectrum seem to be in agreement that a major part of the reason why the price of oil did not go much higher, as many had predicted, is because China dramatically decreased its imports of oil from the time that the war began on February 28th. Now, one thing that must be said about this is that that's not the only reason why the price of oil remained at the level that it did, which was much lower than many anticipated. Another reason is that the United States and other major hoarders of oil released huge amounts of their strategic reserves of oil into the market. And this has had the impact of, in fact, bringing the United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve to a level that could breach the limit, which would result in damage to the reservoirs for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States. So this is also another huge factor. It's not all China. I don't even know that it's mostly China, but China was quite unquestionably a factor. Okay, so I think we can say that with confidence. When it gets to the question of why they did it, which is the question you're asking, Karim, I mean, let's be honest. We all have to be honest in the alternative media. We don't really know for sure. There's a lot of speculation. This happens a lot in the alternative media. People saying things with confidence when they really don't know. And I'm going to tell you straight up, I don't know the answer to your question. I'm just guessing here. So let me throw out a few guesses. One guess is that that China and Iran, the governments, had an agreement. We shouldn't assume that the Iranian government was opposed to China's decision to dramatically increase or decrease its oil imports. It might have been consulted on this and might have said, might have done some kind of private exchange with China. China might have been concerned for selfish reasons to limit the increase in the price of oil, but at the same time might have said to the Iranian government, we're going to buy whatever oil you can get out of the Persian Gulf. And despite the fact that that's going to expose us to a very considerable risk, because the United States is going to, do everything it can to economically coerce us or penalize us for doing this. So let's do a deal here. And they might have had an understanding. I don't know whether that's the case. It's possible that they didn't, and that the Iranian government privately is quite upset about this. But if they are, they've not said anything. I follow very, very carefully the commentary of the Iranian government, various people who are authorized to varying degrees to speak on its behalf. I have not seen an iota of complaint about what China has done. So take that for what you will. Another possible explanation here is that China is actually genuinely concerned about people in the global south who are going to suffer because of the increase in the price of oil. It's not the American consumers who are going to suffer the most. Okay, it is countries from the global south that are critically dependent upon commodities being exported out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz who are going to suffer first and foremost. So China might have had a completely honorable objective, which was to limit the pain to those countries. Just a guess. I'm not saying that that's the reason. Now, another possible reason why they might have done it is they reached some secret understanding with Donald Trump, which benefited from the perspective of the Chinese government, China itself. Or another reason why they might have done it is because they sort of wanted to slowly boil the frog. And they thought it would be too dangerous to suddenly inflict huge catastrophic damage on the global economy and to avoid, the more extreme reactions like nukes, which the United States and Israel have in abundance. And I think we can all say with some confidence are capable of using them. They might have been concerned about, too sudden and dramatic a shock to the global economy and how that might have affected these genocidal maniacs. I'm not trying to excuse this at all. I don't know why they did it, but I can see that they might have some legitimate reasons for doing it. That's all I can say on that subject, Karim.
Yeah, and exactly. I'm in the exactly same boat, and I like this answer because that is the kind of answer that we should expect of ourselves, but also the kinds of questions we should ask instead of just saying that everything is a fantastic tactic behind the scenes that eventually helps Iran, or the other way around, that everything China does is bad, bad, bad. But I would like to have these wrestle with these questions honestly, so we can. What is the intention behind anti-imperialist media? The intention is that we get to a world where we actually try to improve things and question the things that don't work. And this is one of those questions I really have. I mean, let's not forget, both Iran and China are black boxes when it comes to their public statements. We don't know what's going on behind the scene. And what you said is exactly right. It may be that Iran was okay with it and that there was a deal, or indeed that they had that the Chinese talked to Trump and found a way to help each other. We unfortunately just do not know, and these governments are not the type of governments that are very open about the exact policies that they engage in, foreign policy. So I understand, Jamal, that it's very frustrating. I feel that frustration too. And on the other hand, I also understand it when, for example, Warwick Powell says, yeah, but, maybe they made a balanced decision about the world economy. What is your reading of this, Ajamu? And I would like to also add, what is your feeling that you get? I often am very interested in that. How do you feel about it? For me, it feels frustrating. I'm being honest about my feelings. How is that for you?
Well, I'm actually. I think the important question to ask in these kinds of situations is not so much any attempt to try to read anybody's mind, but to look at the consequences. Look at the impact that these decisions have on material reality. We can't. I think we would be very frustrated trying to figure these things out in that way. I'm not that interested in that. What I'm interested in is looking at what might these kinds of decisions, what kind of impact does it have on what many of us see as the absolute necessity to engage in a more effective anti-imperialist struggle. So when we see decisions that seem to undercut the positions of Iran in the midst of this existential battle for survival on the part of China. And we see these sort of vague references by the president of the United States suggesting that there may be some kind of role that China is playing to moderate the positions of China. Um, I think that we need to take that seriously. And we have to then, I think, raise questions around objectively, where are the Chinese when it comes to these kinds of anti-imperialist struggles? Uh, Part of the frustration that some of us have when we look at the Chinese and even the Russians from time to time is that, and we've talked about this on this program before, a kind of strange naivete. when it comes to an understanding of the Western mind, coupled with, of course, the Western material interest. And that there is this desire to believe that they are, in fact, working with rational actors, that there can be some kind of international stability in the midst of this global struggle for not just survival, but for hegemony. And there's always been a strange kind of naivety with both the Chinese and the Russians, believing or wanting to believe that there can be some degree of peaceful coexistence, even as we are in the midst of this profound historical change globally. So, having to bite the bullet and to experience significant economic dislocation by not providing the conditions that would undermine Iran, but in the long run would benefit the shift in the international balance of forces. I think that may have been a better decision than to be the quote unquote responsible party, concerned about the global economy, concerned about the economies of the global South. Not saying we shouldn't be concerned, but the fact of the matter is that basically, as long as we have the continuation of U.S. and Western hegemony, the plight of the economies in the global South will continue to be very difficult. So the issue is now is it might sound ultra left to some forces, but the issue now is about struggle. The issue now is what is going to be the ultimate correlation and balance of forces globally, and that being in denial that the West, the under the hegemony and the guidance and the leadership of the U.S. have made it quite clear that they are in this to win, that they are prepared to do whatever is necessary to attempt to try to maintain their global hegemony. And when you understand that, then you can understand better what the tasks and responsibilities must be at this particular historical moment. So, materially, let's look at the consequences of these kinds of actions. Does it strengthen or weaken Western imperialism?
Very, very well said, Ajamu. And actually, I found it very difficult, but that shows my inexperience to put it on the word. But you put it on the word so excellently, because it really puts on the word what I was trying to say. And I just completely agree with you here. If we are thinking short term, yes, I agree. You should take the heat of the oil market because the global South may suffer. If you think long term, if you do this, you give more breathing space to imperialism and it will continue to thrive. So you need to make a decision. Then people can say, of course, well, China thinks in this case short term because it wants to take the heat off the oil market, the global South maybe. And if we think this way, that I would find that surprising, because China also did not have a problem to think long term to make its economy grow and have a very, very suffering proletariat. Let's be honest, there is a huge problem of working class exploitation in China. This was necessary, you could almost say, to make the economy grow long term. And people would then say that's because of they are on the path to socialism. So this needs to happen now, even though it's painful. In the end, China will go towards socialism. Okay, I believe you. But then why is China not long term when it comes to attacking imperialism and helping Iran, harming the economy to such an extent that the United States is going to suffer? And I think you make a very good point, Ajamu. What is the material effect? What is the outcome of this? Does it give more breathing space to imperialism on the long term? Or is it actually helping us? You know what I mean? And like you said, I think we are in a struggle, and we need to find a way to hurt imperialism and by doing this, you give it more. You actually give it more breathing space on the long term, and which is in the end more harmful, I would say, to the global South, because the global South has already been under 500 years of absolute depravity inflicted by imperialism. Would you like to respond to? You want to say something else, Ajamu?
I do. I think it's important as we talk about and use the term imperialism that we have to remind ourselves and people who are listening that when we talk about imperialism, we are talking about basically the international expression of capitalism. Okay, it is the what we refer to as the colonial capitalist system that has to be seen as the enemy, the force that has to be transformed if we're going to be able to survive on this planet. And so when we attempt to try to look at the Chinese and Chinese policies, for example, and we talk about material reality and the material effect of certain kinds of policies, what is the one of the questions that can be raised is what is the material consequence of a developmental strategy that results in the creation of private sector millionaires or sometimes billionaires in a society that claims that is moving towards socialism, and that a number of these millionaires and billionaires are actually members of the Chinese Communist Party. What kind of ideological impact does that have, and does that then translate into the materiality of decisions being made by the Chinese government? So this concern about maintaining the integrity of the global capitalist market, and that's how we have to understand it and remind ourselves that's the objective reality. Might be seen by powerful elements inside the party and inside the state as being more important than the struggles right now of Iran. And that as long as the economy is, as long as the Chinese are able to do what they need to do in order to protect their particular national interests, and even though they may give public denunciations around U.S. policies, but if they are not objectively prepared to struggle, to sacrifice in order to actually weaken the West, then what is this all about? What is this all about? What is if we recognize that the nature of the global economy is one still characterized by global capitalist accumulation processes, imperialism, then objectively, what does this mean when we talk about a win-win? If something is a winner for global capitalism, isn't that objectively a reactionary position? That's a question.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. I can only agree with that, and it reminds me of the discussion. You also talked about that naivete a bit, and it reminds me of a discussion Dimitri had with John Helmer, who said about Putin. I actually cut out that moment and put it in our show as an introduction, where John Helmer actually said, "We have to admit, Putin doesn't understand imperialism. He really doesn't." And it just reminds me that frustration in John Helmer, like, what is he doing? Being so soft or helping the West? And we all struggle with these questions. We're often not allowed to ask those questions on the left, but on this channel we do, and on Dimitri's channel as well, and Ajamu, of course, also. What's going on here? Do you want to respond to what Ajamu just said, Dimitri?
I agree with every damn thing that Ajamu just said. I couldn't. A hearty, concurrence. I would only I would add one slight qualification, and that is before we judge what China or any actor on the world stage has done during the course of this war, let's remember that it's far from over. So when all the evidence is in and the battle, the bloodshed has ceased and some kind of a resolution has been reached, which will happen at one point or another, we may look back and say, oh, that made perfect sense what China did. So it's, but based upon currently available evidence, people have a lot of reason to be asking some hard questions about what China did. There's no question about it. And I want to, just emphasize one aspect of what Ajamu said, and that is every one of these countries, Russia, China, Iran, have an oligarchy. And that oligarchy does, to varying degrees, exercise considerable influence over the decision making of the state. They are fundamentally capitalist societies. Now, that doesn't mean that their capitalist system is exactly the same as the capitalist systems we have in the West, but fundamentally they are capitalist societies, and this has allowed a very small number of people to accumulate huge amounts of wealth in all three of these countries, which they use to subvert the national interest in preference to their own interests. And that, by the way, may be part of the reason why Iran entered into this MOU at this particular time. It may be there's some well-to-do people in Iran who were more interested in mending fences with the West because it would personally profit them than in doing what was necessary to advance the long-term interests of the Iranian nation. So we may see there may be a similar process going on right now in China with respect to how to respond to this war. We must always bear that in mind. And when we ask questions like, why did the Iranian government negotiate with Trump? Or similarly, a lot of people have been asking the question, why is the government of Russia negotiating with Trump, with Witkoff and Kushner, these arch shysters who have already betrayed, who've already demonstrated their extraordinary unreliability, their bad faith, their self-interest, their self-dealing. Why do they continue to negotiate with these people? These are all legitimate questions, and I think it has something to do with the fact that there are oligarchies in these countries, and they do exercise considerable influence over governmental decision-making. We can't lose sight of that. But to come back to the question at hand, what I will say, in addition to the comments I've offered, is that these governments are not saintly. We must never lose sight of that. Whatever it is motivating them, whatever the internal debate may be that underlies their decision-making with respect to, for example, Chinese government imports of oil during this critically important period. I, for one, accept that they are not saintly. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of people, it seems, in the alternative media, the people who focus on anti-imperialism, who are prepared to entertain the possibility that sometimes the governments of Russia and China, and we can also talk about Brazil, we could talk about India, other key members of the BRICS, why they make decisions that they do and whether, in fact, they are truly committed to the struggle against imperialism. These are very important questions. And I, for one, lean towards the camp of skepticism, although I readily acknowledge and will never stop saying that the primary culprits in the world today are Western governments and the oligarchs who control them. No question about it. But we should stop talking about these governments of the major BRICS, major BRICS nations, as being pure as the driven snow, because that's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think we get nowhere if we turn into anti-imperialist MAGA, where we just celebrate everything the other camp does. There's just literally no improvement, and it's just intellectual junk food, man. I watch these, I read these anti-imperialist websites. I watch channels. I will not name names. We're not this kind of channel, but it's like a lot of them. I would say 90%. And it's just intellectual junk food. It's all hallelujah. It's all great. And it really insults the mind when you listen to this. I cannot handle it. I literally cannot handle it. And I always say, as long as you have such a huge segment of the elites in these countries, can be Russia, can be Iran, can be China, can be Brazil, doesn't matter. If you have such a significant segment that sends their kids to Western Ivy League schools to get educated, they are not getting imperialism. I'm sorry to be so harsh, but if you are an anti-imperialist society, you say, our universities are good enough, my kids stay here. And I'm not going to let them be indoctrinated over there and come over here. Because it is true. Chinese education is good enough. It is fantastic. It is. It easily competes with Western education. So for me, that makes no sense. And I think that's the psychological component we also need to talk about. I don't know if you have anything to jump in on, Ajamu?
Well, it's psychological and ideological components that we have to try to understand. And you're absolutely right that basically, I think some of these societies have been quite naive around the question of what happens when you, in fact, send millions of your students to the West who are going to be exposed to a certain kind of educational process, while you simultaneously are suggesting you're trying to build a socialist alternative. You're almost, in a way, sort of constructing a fifth columnist within your society. But also, I think, reflects on another issue. Um, and that is, the complexities and the contradictions, not only in the Chinese society, but the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party. Um, uh, Dimitri referenced the notion of oligarchy. Oligarchy is a particular form of rule, ruled by the, in this case, a capitalist elite, if you will. Um, I don't. I have to make a distinction in my mind between, say, a Russian society and, in fact, China, with all of the issues and contradictions in China. I don't see um, a. I think it's a little difficult to characterize the rule in China as one that's controlled by an oligarchy. I think there's a particular kind of ideological orientation that um, does not that is in contradiction with the policies that must be and should be pursued if one is attempting to try to, in fact, build socialism with Chinese characteristics. But the Chinese Communist Party has been quite successful, I think, in ensuring that uh, the capitalist class is not able to actually rule as a class. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have influence, as what I referenced earlier, in terms of kind of conservatism when it comes to a direct confrontation with the West, a desire to want to just sort of normalize relationships so that everybody can just make money, win-win. Um, but I think that that's a lot different than, say, the Russian society, where there is a predominance of power with an oligarchy, and that people have to remind or be reminded that the emergence or the ascendancy of Putin was at a moment of counter-revolution in the Soviet Union, at that point in the Russian Federation. That these were the ascendancy of rightist powers, rightist forces within Russia. Okay, and what is happening in Iran is somewhat similar in the sense that there are some powerful neoliberal forces in the Iranian state, in the Iranian society, that have served as moderating forces for Iranian politics. What's interesting, though, is that those moderating forces are now in retreat. And I'm curious to hear some more from Dimitri in terms of things he saw over there, because there seems to be a militant, a radicalism now that has, I think, significantly reduced the space for the moderates or the neoliberals to openly advocate aggressively the idea that there can be some kind of peaceful coexistence with the U.S., and that the kinds of policies that the neoliberals have been pushing in Iran are the policies that will emerge in a post-war Iran.
Yeah, if I
Yeah,
may,
go ahead,
Karim,
Dimitri.
I again, I find myself in total agreement with what Ajamu said. I want to clarify that when I said perhaps oligarchy was not the best term for me to use, maybe it would have been billionaire class or the economic elite, because oligarchy implies that they actually do run the country. I don't believe that that's true in China. I think China has done a relatively good job. I totally agree with Ajamu of corralling the economic elite and ensuring that its agenda does not conflict with that of the interests of the state, the long-term interests of the state. Of all the major BRICS powers, I think China has done the best job of controlling that economic elite. But it's there, and it does exercise influence that runs counter to the long-term interests of the Chinese people, of ordinary workers in China. I think we have to be honest about that. And that's true in all of these countries to some degree. Even in Russia, where there is a powerful billionaire class that exercises considerable influence, let's not forget that Putin threw the richest man in Russia, Khodorkovsky, into the Huzgau and divested him of the vast majority of his wealth. This is not something I've ever seen in my lifetime in any major Western country. And I know that in the West, they like to talk about Khodorkovsky as though he's some sort of political dissident and a hero of human rights. But I think those of us who have a dimmer view of imperialism and capitalism know that that's nothing but nonsense. In any case,
in the West, if I just am allowed to jump in for a bit, Dimitri, in the West, I always say in the West, the wealthy just never go to jail. In the West, the super wealthy, the criminals, the capitalist class just do not go to jail unless in a very, very unique situation. But you can be the most depraved Epstein Island goers, genocidal maniacs. The war criminals never go to jail. These monsters will never. There's no justice system for these people in power. So the fact that the West is so finger wagging to all these other societies, that they're so corrupt and how dare oligarchies and this, we have I would say we have the worst class with total impunity when it comes to when we think about the corruption and all this kind of. We have the only class in the world that's not only the wealthiest but lives and behaves with total impunity. And I would say the best example state level is Israel. I would say that's the best example of it. And I would say when it comes to individuals, the best example is the Epstein files and, of course, all the wars that have been waged, and no war criminals are ever going to jail. Sorry, go ahead, Dimitri.
This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, Karim, because I've been a lawyer for most of my career, and I started in Wall Street in the 90s. And I remember at the beginning of my career, it was possible to send an American billionaire to jail. The last one who was actually tossed into the Huzgau was Bernie Madoff, as far as I can tell. Now, a lot of people are watching this program probably never even heard of that dude because it was so damn long ago. But Bernie Madoff was a billionaire fraudster who was actually the president of the NASDAQ for quite some time. And he was discovered to have been running a Ponzi scheme. And the American authorities, I believe this was the Bush administration, had no alternative but to prosecute and convict and send him to jail for a very long time because the evidence was simply overwhelming. But since then, there has been virtual impunity for billionaire crimes throughout the West. No question about it. But in any case, I want to return to something that Ajamu said. He wondered about the conditions in Iran, and I just want to comment on that to the best to the best of my ability, based on what I saw and heard. And so I was in Iran for 8 days during the funeral for the martyred Supreme Leader, and saw masses of people, the likes of which I've never seen in my life. All the hundreds of protests I've participated in, I never saw anything like this. With my own eyes, I saw millions of people assembled in Tehran and in Mashhad, where the 7-day funeral program concluded, and the martyred supreme leader was laid to rest. And I wasn't in Qom, the holy city of Qom. I wasn't in Najaf at Kabbalah. Many millions more participated in those funereal events. And there's, on the ground in Iran, and this is not just, I'm not simply commenting on what I saw on this trip. I was also there in March during the hot phase of the war, the second half of March. To the extent there is a Western-oriented segment of the population that wants to do a deal, abandon the axis of resistance, turn Iran into some kind of secular Western-style capitalist paradise, they've disappeared. They're nowhere to be seen. Now, that doesn't mean they don't exist. They're still there. I can't comment in any confident way on what proportion of the population they constitute, but I suspect that they constitute a minority, a small minority at this particular moment in Iranian history, and they are completely invisible. You will not find them in the streets. You will find many, many people in the streets who are either supporting the government or who are criticizing it for not being sufficiently hard on the Americans and the Israelis. But I don't see any criticism, any public criticism in Iran coming from shall we say, the pro-Western, capitalist-oriented elements of the population. They are there. They've just gone underground. They do exist, but I don't think
But
their
they are in
voices...
power, Dimitri, aren't they? They are in power, aren't they?
In Iran? No, I don't believe they're in power.
Pezeshkian, those types?
No, but I think Pezeshkian is he's sympathetic to some degree to their perspective, but Pezeshkian is fundamentally committed to the Islamic Republic. That doesn't mean I agree with all the decisions that they've made. That doesn't mean that I have complete faith in him to do what is in the long-term interests of Iran. But I don't think we should view Pezeshkian as some kind of a sellout to the West. No, I don't think that the Iranian people would tolerate anybody like that.
Oh, no. I'm not saying sellout. I'm saying the type of person who is willing to negotiate and try to find a middle way with the West. And I think that's
he's definitely up until very recently, he clearly was that. No question about it. But within what constraints? Within what parameters? The position of the Iranian government, led by Pezeshkian, has been, I'm not going to say it has been maximalist, but they've essentially negotiated in the form of the MOU a capitulation by the United States. The problem with it is that the United States government never had any intention of complying with the deal. But on paper, it's a hell of a good deal. I mean, you consider the disadvantages that Iran confronted. So they did negotiate terms that were impressive. The problem, again, is that there was no reasonable prospect of the United States government ever complying with this deal. And we can get into a discussion about whether they understood this and why they did it. If they did understand this, that's a separate discussion. But it was a pretty damn good deal for Iran that they negotiated on paper.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. Ajamu, any thoughts? Sorry, I muted you because of the background noise. You're still muted, by the way. If you go to the bottom, there is a microphone. Should be a microphone.
Okay, yeah. No, I also agree, and I think me and Dimitri may have talked about this before. That we both saw that this MOU process was basically a pause, that the objectives of U.S. policy has always been, over the last 47 years, to undermine, to destroy the Republic of the Islamic Republic. And so this was I think we laughed about the fact that we knew that the $300 and something billion investment fund or whatever was never going to happen. Okay. So this was a pause that allowed for, and I think you made a very, very credible argument, Dimitri, in terms of the material need that that Iran had in terms of trying to move that oil out as much and as fast as they could, you know, knowing that basically they may have had 60 days. I predicted that it wouldn't even last 60 days, and unfortunately that was the case. But also saw too that a lessening of that kind of naivete we talked about earlier among the Iranian negotiators, and you wonder now, what is the objective of this phase of the conflict? Do U.S. policymakers actually think that they're going to drive the Iranians back to the table to, in essence, surrender? I mean, it's like there's no basis for a conversation now, for a discussion, for an agreement, for diplomacy. Now it appears is they are trapped on that escalator, a ladder, and what the U.S. seems to be pursuing just is almost seems irrational, unless they are moving up that escalator ladder to, I think I think it's a real possibility of making a justification for actually crossing that last red line. And I say last red line, meaning that in the West, with this Gaza thing, the beginning of it, every red line that was part of normal international behavior, international law principles, when it came to things like attacking civilian infrastructure, even though people did it, but things like hospitals and food storage facilities, and then the normalization of torture. At first, the Israelis said that we want to impose starvation, but we know the world wouldn't allow us. Well, they did. Every red line has been crossed. The last red line now that's already been crossed by the U.S. years ago. But the last red line now is what?
Alright guys, the whole video is 97 minutes long, so we still have a long way to go. However, the stuff that we are talking about is not very YouTube friendly, so we hope to get you over to Substack. Please subscribe to our Substack, link is in the description. There you can watch the whole show for free, where we will talk about global fascism, the FIFA World Cup and the corrupt stuff they are doing, and of course geopolitics and things that YouTube doesn't like. Alright, subscribe to our Substack, come over, there the show is for free, link is in the description.